The invite came at 7:43 a.m. A thin gray bar at the top of my calendar marked Room 4C, mandatory. No subject, no sender. Just a location and a time 9:00 sharp. I stared at it for a moment unmoving. In 18 years at Ridgemont, I'd never once received a meeting request without a name. Not from legal, not from compliance, not even during the last acquisition. It wasn't a meeting. I knew that immediately. It was a signal. I arrived at 8:57. I never arrived late. Room 4C was already occupied. Elliot Chambers, Ridgemont's new CEO, barely a year into his tenure, and already notorious for his fresh eyes, sat with one ankle balanced over his knee like he was moderating a panel, not delivering bad news. Across from him, a young woman from HR I didn't recognize fidgeted with a closed manila folder. Her blouse still had a faint crease down the sleeve fresh from the package. No one offered me a seat, so I took the one directly across from Elliot. I folded my hands in my lap. He nodded, tight-lipped. "Maris," he began, "thank you for coming on such short notice." As if I had a choice. We've been conducting a realignment looking at where we're going long-term. You've been an incredible part of Ridgemont's foundation, but your role is no longer aligned with the company's forward strategy. He used the tone people use at memorial services. Soft, performative grief. I nodded once. I didn't ask questions. There will, of course, be a generous severance package, he added, and the transition team will ensure everything moves forward smoothly. My eyes didn't leave his. He blinked. No mention of the 21 million German renewable logistics contract I'd closed last week, written in legal German, negotiated over 6 months of evening calls with 3 regional ministers. No mention of how Berlin's transport consortium required that all future amendments include the original liaison me, or that the clause had been approved by their general counsel just 2 days ago. I reached for the envelope the HR woman finally slid across the table. My name was typed in 11-point Arial. Elliot exhaled through his nose. "We appreciate your service." I stood without responding, nodded once, walked out. The hallway smelled of lemon floor polish and new carpet glue. Down the corridor, someone laughed inside a glass-walled breakout room. I walked past them without turning. I didn't need to look back to know they had no idea what they'd just done. I placed the envelope on the entry table without opening it. Its weight was unimpressive, 6 sheets maybe. Severance terms, tax forms, legal signatures. Nothing inside could tell me anything I didn't already know. Nothing inside could undo what had just happened. I took off my blazer, hung it on the hallway hook, and slipped off my shoes. The quiet of my apartment wrapped around me like a familiar coat. No hum of conference calls, no ping of Slack, just the old radiator ticking in the corner and the faint smell of chamomile from the tea bag I'd forgotten to throw away that morning. I didn't sit. I walked to the shelf in the back room and ran my fingers along the spines of the binders, Nordrhein contracting Stuttgart memorandums, Munich legal addenda. Each one labeled in black marker, worn just enough to show use, but not neglect. I pulled them down one by one, stacking them on the rug. Some hadn't been opened in years. Others I'd touched just last week. I slid the rubber band off a thick folder labeled 2012 Bonn Infrastructure Negotiations. Inside were annotated faxes, printouts of email threads, a napkin with a phone number scribbled in blue ink, and a note Vogt prefers formal, see not do cultural boundary, do not cross. No one had asked me to write that. No one ever instructed me to explain the difference between linguistic accuracy and diplomatic survivability. I just knew. Because if you cross the wrong line in Germany, you don't get a second chance. That's what Elliot and his restructuring team never understood. Words matter, but only when they land with the right weight in the right context delivered by someone they trust. I spent the rest of the afternoon reorganizing, not sorting for storage, but for readiness. This wasn't an archive. It was a toolkit. By dusk, the floor was covered in tabs and page flags, and on top of one binder, my old Post-it remained intact. Never assume you're replaceable, but prepare for the moment they do. I picked up the Munich file and flipped to the final clause, the one Dr. Vogt had refused to sign without my input. The Munich file took me back to Berlin 2017. The conference room was colder than usual, all sharp edges and polished glass. 3 representatives from the Berlin Transit Authority sat across from us, lips pursed, shoulders squared. The meeting had gone stiff the moment the new junior counsel from our side misread a clause in the lease-to-own agreement. He'd translated Verbindliche Rahmenvereinbarung as binding template, and Dr. Vogt's expression had flattened like slate. This Vogt said, "Holding up the printed page is not acceptable." The junior looked to me, saw panic flaring in his eyes. I took the paper, gently scanned the section, and rewrote the clause by hand. My pen moved slowly, not because I doubted the language, but because I needed them to see the care. I adjusted one verb and repositioned the phrase to reflect not just legality, but respect. When I passed it back, Vogt read it silently, then nodded once. This, he said, "Tapping the corner is Frau Feldner's work. We do not negotiate in English when she is in the room." He never looked at anyone else after that. I was no longer the quiet support at the edge of the table. I was the table. Back at Ridgemont, no one asked how the deal closed after 3 months of stalled progress. No one asked how a delegation that had nearly walked out ended up expanding the project's scope by 30%. The weekly report listed the contract as finalized, and that was the end of it. I didn't push for recognition. I never had. There was a strange comfort in being essential and unnoticed at the same time, like oxygen taken for granted until it's gone. My language wasn't just German, it was nuance. It was when to pause, when to interject with mit Verlaub, when to signal a pivot with a phrase that softened resistance instead of provoking it. My job was never translation, it was navigation. I closed the Munich binder and reached for another Berlin Phase 2. I remembered the clause we'd left open, awaiting final signatures this week. I drafted it myself down to the placement of the comma. Sunday evening, I logged into the internal portal one last time. My credentials hadn't been disabled yet. Oversight or delay, I wasn't sure. The calendar view opened automatically color-coded chaos across departments. But there, unmissable, in bold red, Berlin delegation. Final signing 9:00 a.m. Conference room A. They were still coming. I leaned back, watching the screen. No updates, no notes, no mention of any change. The guest list still had my name as primary contact. Dr. Vogt, 3 advisors, Ridgemont executive team. I scrolled through the prep file, the same one I'd built from scratch, seating chart dietary needs, presentation flow translation protocols. Even the tea order was mine. Lindenblüten tea, no caffeine, steeped exactly 5 minutes. Vogt's preference for low drama mornings, he once joked. They didn't know I was gone. No one had told them. The thought hit with a cold finality. I wasn't surprised Elliot hadn't reached out to them. He wouldn't see it as necessary. In his view, the person handling logistics was just that, a person who managed calendars and called car services. He didn't understand what it meant to be the one who held the tone, the trust, the history. I thought briefly about sending a message, just a quiet heads up to Vogt's assistant, something neutral and professional. But I stopped myself. I wasn't their employee anymore, and they deserved to learn from the people who made the choice. Instead, I opened the original confirmation PDF. I reread my final email to the German team, the one I'd sent last month, confirming agenda points, noting that I'd be present for final semantic review. The last line still sat there, untouched, looking forward to finalizing our long-standing collaboration together. I closed the laptop gently. The sun had dipped low enough that the window reflected nothing but the soft gold of late evening. I didn't need to be there for tomorrow's meeting. My absence would do the speaking. In the quiet, I walked to the kitchen and poured water into the kettle. It was time to stop rereading old messages. There were new ones waiting. The call came late Saturday afternoon, just after I'd returned from a walk. I didn't recognize the number, but something about the international code made me pause before letting it go to voicemail. I answered on the 4th ring. Maris Feldner. The voice asked, warm but deliberate. Yes, I said. This is Levin Klaus, North Reaver Strategies. I hadn't heard that name in over a year. We'd met at a regulatory conference in Frankfurt briefly. I'd given a short talk on embedded compliance in multilingual contracts, and Levin had stayed behind afterward to ask questions. Real ones. The kind that showed he actually understood what I was saying, not just waiting for his turn to speak. I heard what happened at Ridgemont. He continued. I won't ask for the details, but I will say this. We're accelerating our Germany expansion. We need someone who understands more than grammar and headlines, someone who knows how to translate culture into continuity. Would you consider leading that? There was no pause for persuasion, no pitch deck, just a door quietly opened. I didn't need time to think. Yes, I said. He exhaled. Good. I'll loop you into the initial infrastructure notes. Call Monday, I confirmed. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet and let the shift settle in. Not rage, not vindication, just clarity. Ridgemont had seen me as a chapter closed. Levin saw me as a blueprint. I didn't rush to open my laptop. I didn't need to prove anything anymore. But I did reach for my notebook, the one I'd filled with margin notes and meeting fragments over the years. I turned to a blank page and wrote one word at the top, North River. Then slowly, I started sketching out what I wished Ridgemont had asked me to build all along. A framework that didn't just translate language, but protected it. By the time the sun dipped below the skyline, I'd outlined the beginning of a system. Something stronger. Something I wouldn't have to apologize for. And when I turned off the light, I already knew exactly what Monday would bring. I wasn't there, but I could picture every detail. Ridgemont had set the stage, floral centerpieces in muted tones, pastries from the French place, 2 blocks over the PowerPoint deck, with all the right logos and none of the right meaning. Someone had even remembered to order decaf espresso, though I doubted anyone knew why. I'd been the one who first learned Dr. Vogt avoided caffeine before diplomatic reviews. At 9:00 sharp, the delegation from Berlin entered. Dr. Anselm Vogt led flanked by 2 senior advisors. Their coats still dusted with the Chicago morning chill, they moved with the calm deliberation of people who'd already made up their minds. Elliot stood by the conference room entrance posture, sharpened to perfection. He greeted them with that shallow warmth executives reserve for people they don't understand but know they need. They shook hands. They were ushered in, and then Vogt asked the question, "Where is Frau Feldner?" It was quiet, just 5 words. Calm, precise. Elliot hesitated, blinked. She's no longer with us, no apology, no context. Just a statement of absence, like noting someone had taken a different elevator. Vogt looked at him for a long moment, then gave a half nod, the kind you might give when confirming the end of something rather than its continuation. Then neither are we. He turned. His advisors followed without hesitation. The translator, who had remained standing by the wall, slipped out behind them, not a word spoken. I hadn't needed to be in that room to feel it. The silence afterward would have said everything. The untouched tea, the flat breath of a projector still running with no audience, and Elliot standing in a room built for diplomacy with no bridge left to cross it. I didn't hear about it officially. No one at Ridgemont sent a statement or called to explain, but by 10:00 a.m., 3 texts had arrived, one from Tina, in legal too, from former colleagues who had once dismissed my long meetings as overkill. They all said the same thing. They left. By 10:15, my phone buzzed again, this time with a screenshot. Elliot standing behind the glass hand, still mid-gesture lips, parted like he had started a sentence no one stuck around to hear. The caption below it read simply, 21 hours there evaporated in under 4 minutes. I imagined the room as I had left it last, but stripped now of intent. The pastries still warm on the silver trays, the water glasses fogging slightly in the untouched air. Every detail I had once arranged with precision was now a silent witness to what they'd undone. No raised voices, no slammed doors, just absence. I knew the rhythm that would follow. First, the frozen pause where no one quite knows what to say, only that something irreversible has happened. Then the flurry. By 11:00, I was told the executive team was in a closed-door meeting. Elliot had called in legal HR and 2 outside consultants. Someone in marketing quietly took down the LinkedIn post celebrating their new head of EU partnerships. The post hadn't even been up a full week. What none of them could admit, at least not aloud, was that there hadn't been a plan beyond removal. No transition, no backup, no continuity. They hadn't thought they needed one. That's always the danger when the work someone does is seamless. You think it's easy because it never fails. You think it's replicable because it's quiet. But the absence wasn't quiet anymore. It was thunderous. By noon, a voicemail from Elliot's assistant arrived unusually formal and brimming with neutral phrases. He hoped I was available for a short confidential discussion. There had been recent developments. They were hoping to explore a path forward. I didn't return the call. Instead, I opened the email from Levin with the infrastructure documents attached and began reading through the metadata and embedded clauses. The language was raw, the framework still forming, but I could already see where it would go. It didn't need polish, it needed integrity, and it needed someone who knew the difference. By Wednesday, the tone shifted. The emails came more frequently, more carefully worded. Elliot's name finally appeared in the sender line, but never alone. Always CC'd with someone from legal or a senior manager I hadn't spoken to in years. They framed it as reconnecting, as preserving continuity, as honoring your institutional knowledge. But none of it sounded like respect. It sounded like panic. On Thursday, they used the phrase consulting flexibility. That was new. They offered options, asked for timelines. Perhaps a hybrid model one message suggested. We'd be open to short-term engagements tailored to your expertise. I didn't answer directly. My attorney did. The response was 2 pages, professional, clean, unemotional. It listed the conditions in simple bullet points. Triple my previous rate, no internal meetings, no onboarding or handover, remote access only, 90-day sunset clause with no renewal. They agreed within 48 hours. There was no negotiation, no red line edits, no counteroffer, just a formal reply accepting every term and a digital contract returned with signatures by close of business Friday. The speed told me everything. Meanwhile, Levin had looped me into North River's first round of strategic briefings for the merger opportunity. He didn't say who the target was, but I didn't need to ask. The documents made it obvious. It was Ridgemont's former German client base, the very accounts they were now scrambling to stabilize. I kept my focus clean. North River didn't ask for loyalty. They asked for accuracy. They trusted me to lead, not just follow instructions. And Ridgemont. They would get what they paid for, a sterile, limited arrangement tightly scoped. I would review translation clauses, advise on regulatory exposure, deliver assessments. Nothing more. No meetings, no transition plans, no training for my replacement. I didn't want a seat back at their table. I was designing my own. When the signed agreement hit my inbox, I filed it in a folder labeled Containment Not Collaboration. Then I poured myself a glass of water and turned back to the proposal from North River's legal team. There was a section on multilingual assurance standards they wanted me to refine. I had just the clause for it. 3 weeks passed before the ripple made its way back to me. I wasn't looking for it, but it found me anyway through a forwarded email buried beneath 2 lines of pleasantries from a former colleague who'd once laughed at my color-coded briefing tabs. Ridgemont had submitted a proposal to the Hamburg Infrastructure Authority. It was a large bid, ambitious. They listed deliverables, deadlines, pricing tiers. It was structured, branded, technically competent, but sterile. There was no liaison named, no cultural framework, no language designation, just an anonymous company stamp stretched across the header. Dr. Vogt responded personally. The email was short. It didn't bother with emotion or explanation. We do not proceed without Frau Feldner. That was it. I read the line twice, then closed the message without forwarding it. I didn't need the reminder. but it came like a page from a book I'd once written, now quoted back to me without irony. At North River, I was finalizing a different contract, this one with a consortium in Zurich. I adjusted a preamble to reflect recent regulatory shifts and inserted a clause clarifying bilateral expectations on communication cadence. At the bottom of the page, I initialed the section FINA 3.4a. I never signed full names on working drafts, but clients started recognizing those initials. They asked for clauses in Feldner format. They wanted phrasing that didn't just pass legal, it passed honor. I didn't post about the rejection Ridgemont received. I didn't send it to Levin or add it to my case studies. I just kept working. Because at some point, you stop needing proof. You stop needing the echo of old institutions to validate your choices. Your value starts to speak in signatures, in clauses no one else would think to write, in meetings that start with the sentence, "We were told you're the one who makes these things actually work." And as I saved the Zurich draft and marked it for final review, my inbox pinged again with a request from Dr. Volt's office to begin a new round of development. This time, they didn't ask if I was available. They asked when I could begin. I walked down LaSalle Street with no destination, rushed. No meeting I had to attend, out of obligation. The city hummed with its usual rhythm, briefcases, crosswalks, coffee lines. I passed Ridgemont's tower without slowing. I didn't glance at the revolving door or the lobby where my badge used to scan green. I had no need to. My path led a few blocks farther south to a smaller building with less glass and more focus. North River's office didn't need to impress from the outside. It operated in results, not architecture. When I stepped through the door, my name was there, etched not on a temporary plate, but into the glass itself, Maris Feldner, Director of Cultural Strategy. No ceremony, no title inflation, just precision, just truth. Inside, I was greeted by colleagues who didn't ask me to prove my relevance. They asked for insight. They asked for nuance. They understood that language wasn't translation, it was leverage. I'd never written a public post about what happened, never hinted at bitterness or loss. I didn't leak the emails. I didn't correct the version Ridgemont surely told themselves. I didn't need to, because now, whenever a cross-border deal enters the room, the first question from the client is the same: is Frau Feldner involved? Not can she be not. Do you have someone like her? Is. The name they once erased had become the one they couldn't proceed without. Some bridges collapse in fire, others decay quietly from neglect. But a few burn themselves because the people walking across them forget who laid the foundation, who reinforced the beams, who kept it stable through every storm. I didn't light the match. I just kept walking. And when North River's next proposal went out signed, sealed, and accepted within 48 hours, I reviewed the final page and saw my name below the closing clause. Nothing flashy, just a line that read, "Prepared by M. Feldner." I closed the file, logged off for the day, and stepped back outside into a city that finally felt like mine.